Of course, we're transitioning from a passage that talked about the Pharaoh and Musa alayhi salam to a passage that says, or Allah's creative power, talks about Allah's creative power. The thing is, there is always a profound connection but it becomes manifest if you reflect here. What we're looking at is Allah, talking about how the Pharaoh, why the Pharaoh thought he was the supreme God. He thought it was a supreme God because he didn't think anybody could build like he does. Anybody had massive empire like he did. And so before we get into this passage, I'd like to give you a little bit of a quick synopsis history of how the Pharaoh came into power. There are lots of theories on it I'll share with you. What I find a very convincing, so originally the pharaohs were multiple kingdoms. They weren't one kingdom, there were multiple pharaohs, multiple kingdoms along the river, okay, and there were maybe 14 of these kingdoms, and they all had minimal power because each of them had some territory, and they did trade with each other, ECE, and of course all of them had some part of the river because their irrigation and the supply for trade. Depends on your access to the river right now. In the time of Yusuf, Yusuf alayhi salam, you remember, saw a dream that there's going to be, or interpreted a dream that there are going to be 7 years where things will be fine, but another 7 years where the river will dry up. There's not going to be any water and the crop is going to die. He was serving under one of the kings, not all of the pharaohs, one of the kings among that, a group of kings. So that kingdom now has an advantage. What advantage do they have? They know that a drought is coming. So they actually developed a canal to preserve water over the next few years. So when the water dried up, the river dried up, they were the only empire of the several empires that actually still had a water supply. And so their crop continued to grow and they continued to have some prosperity in the time where everybody else was basically bankrupt. And now in the olden days, people, they don't have any crop, and none of the other kingdoms have any crop. So obviously, where are they going to come for crop? They're going to come here, but they don't have anything to sell anymore because they've gone bankrupt. And so in the olden days, the way you sold, but the way you got food or commodities was actually by giving away yourself or your children into slavery, or giving up part of your land, actually an old tradition in traditions. When the family is going to be given a year's worth of rice, they have to give their child away. They're going to serve in the field and but he's somebody else's farm, like giving away family or people as slaves, was actually a common economic practice. It is through this course of action that over time this one empire overpowered and overshadowed and eventually completely overtook all the other empires that existed and became the one supreme empire. Everything came under them. This is important to note because they then can especially controlled the water supply. They controlled. Now they had the money that nobody else had. So they built like nobody else did, and they had pasture, meaning they had the greenery that nobody else had now. With that in mind, if you look at these ayats, are you more intense at creation, or is the sky? First of all, is referring to the human beings. Are you more powerful? Are you harder to create than the sky was? He's the one who built the sky in. Other words, how dare you question resurrection when Allah has that power? But from the other point of view, are you better at creating whatever you've created? You Quraysh are like the pharaohs, but you are nothing compared to the pharaohs in construction. As a matter of fact, the construction of the pharaohs is so impressive that it's still today on. The dollar bill, right? It's timeless. It's the symbol of stable empire, And I refer to this over and over: Greek columns, Persian columns, different societies, ancient society, even the columns that are built in some of the government offices in DC, their inspiration is actually the columns of the Egyptians. The architectural inspiration is actually the Egyptian columns that were built in ancient times. And Allah, then it's almost referring to that and saying, are you better at creating things, or is the sky a more marvelous creation than that? Under its canopy, you build all of these things. He's the one who built the sky and the word bana as opposed to is actually a good reference he built. He constructed it, so the notion of construction is being highlighted anyway in the wording of the ayah. He elevated its roof, and by the way, the columns were inhumanely high, like they were unusually high. No, nowadays, when you go to a fancy home, it's like high ceiling. It just gives you this grand view, grand feeling, right? Or if you look at some of the interesting architecture, like one of my favorite places to architecturally interiors is like Grand Central Station in New York. Right, you. Look up, and they've created this like sky cap, and it's really high ceiling ECT, right? If you visit ancient palaces and things, they made an enormously high ceilings, and oftentimes when they would have high ceilings, they would actually draw on them stars or constellations or clouds to give. The feeling as though we have built a sky of our own, we've built the sky of our own right. So that's this fascination of human beings of building their own sky. And so that's being built upon here in the language used by Allah in Arabic, something that stands tall and something that's very high. What does, and evening it out in Arabic, the word actually means something that stands tall, something that's stable. In other words, it's the higher up you build a ceiling, the more unstable it gets, the more support columns and beams it needs. You know, if you have something that's very large and it's standing free, you need more columns to hold it up. It can't, just because it'll cave in on the middle, right? Because it's so much freestanding. So he says he made it balanced, even, and it doesn't shift the sky, doesn't shift the elevation of the sky, doesn't shift. You know, some people look at this ayah, and I should mention that, and say, look, Allah says He built the sky, but the sky meaning space is empty. Vacuum, it's not built, it's just nothingness. So what's He talking about? This is where we have to understand the Quran is not a science textbook. The Quran is remarkable language. It's remarkable language, you know, language. Is the language of people is different from the language of science. There are two different worlds if you're really interested in the language of science, which means you enjoy reading a biology textbook and you're not a normal person. I mean, you're going to do well in school, but you're not a normal person. Thank God we don't speak in scientific language when we speak with each other, right? When you say to somebody, when somebody's making fun of somebody and say, man, he got burned, scientifically, no, you understand, but everybody gets it. You got burned. Somebody says, you man, you tore him to pieces. Somebody called the police, you know, or you know, my some grandpa says, my grandkid stole my heart. Grandpa, I'm coming over right now, you know, like didn't steal your heart, or man, that. Guy has a heart of stone. These phrases that are unscientific, clearly we use all the time. We use these things all the time. The language of science is highly literal. Everything is literally precisely what it is. But the language of humanity is not. It actually draws on images like for example, when a husband says to the wife, I've done everything for you, everything, because everything is a lot of things you know or I've given you everything. So the idea is that when people speak, like for example, man, how beautiful does it look, the sun sinking into the ocean when you're on the west coast of the United States, you see sunset, in Southern California, you see the sunset and you see how beautiful. Does the sun look sinking into the ocean? Well, technically it's not. Sinking into the ocean, it's actually, dummy digging into. The Ocean Quran will say that the name went to a place where the sun was drowning in murky water, and people were like, oh, that's scientifically inaccurate because you can't drown the sun. What are you talking about? When a human being sees that, that's a poetic, beautiful image of the sun drowning in water. That's all it's talking about. It's not what is the Quran supposed to do? Tell you how many millions of miles away the sun is, and that this is an optical illusion. What would you read that punch people in the face who talk like that when you hang out with them? We don't talk like science. We talk in normal language. This is normal language. Look at the grand creation of God, the sky, compared to yours. You try to build this a roof that you know, by the way, ceilings especially, they crack easily. This is why Allah says, do you see a crack in the sky? That's not to say, well, it's empty space. Obviously, it's not going to have a crack. No, Allah is comparing. Look at your inability to create a view that Allah has created, what a flawless view God has created over you, and so our obsession with science has actually made us impose a scientific way of thinking even about the Quran, which is unfair to the book. It's unfair to the book, and it's unrealistic, it's inaccurate, and then we start imposing onto the Quran things that shouldn't be imposed anyway, by the way, just among the notion of the sky family. Those who you know talk about this ayah, about the sky being smoother, evened out, say how perfectly it's made and how reformed it is, how smooth it looks, it has no unevenness to it, and how greatly it's crafted, how beautiful its look it is to look. At any time you look at the sky, it's a symbol of beauty and magnificent. This again, I'm telling you, in the context in which this passage occurs, it's not just talking about the sky, it's actually comparing one of the greatest empires that ever existed and showing how even that fails in comparison to God's creation. How dare you take up a God other than that, other than Allah? And He brought darkness over its nights, and He brought out its early mornings. This is again the reference to night and day. Shouldn't be lost on us that the pharaohs worshipped the sun in Allah. Brings the sun to a close shop every night, and then brings out the morning the next day, meaning their God submits to Allah, means to cause darkness. A desert that is means a desert that is completely covered in darkness, and you can't find your way. Interestingly enough, it also compares the ramash, meaning in the eye, becoming weak when somebody walks slowly because they can barely see. In other words, Allah calls the night to slow everything down and visibility to become less. He did that, and the next morning He brought out its brilliant light. He made everything completely and perfectly visible. I'll show you some of the benefits of this a little bit later on when we talk about the literary qualities of the surah. Is when things are most prominent, meaning like when the sun is at its brightest, like 10, 11, 12 a.m. at that time, when the sun is beaming at its brightest, that's so less. Comparing those two contrasts of the night and the day, this is to highlight, how no matter how grand your columns were built, you can't escape, and how beautifully illuminated they look. In the day, they're going to be closed down and dark in the night and the earth. Thereafter, He made it smooth. Now, the word daha is a unique word, very rarely, maybe not even elsewhere used in the Quran except here. And what does it mean? The ha actually means, I'll skip the Arabic etymology, just tell you what it means. It's actually used for when an ostrich scrapes the ground and makes the soil smooth so it can put its egg there, because it doesn't bury, it's like entirely just makes the ground kind of smooth, and so you can put it there like in a concave shape. And that's why that place is called Amada, and from it that is also used for an egg, because it's the place of but it's not literally the egg. Actually, that's a bad, but daha is the place where the egg is placed. So again, people who are very obsessed with showing a correlation between Islam and science, they looked at this ayah and said, Allah made the earth egg-like, and therefore the earth is oval and it's not a perfect sphere, and the proof of that is in the Quran, except the one problem with that is the verb means to remove unevenness and to make room for an egg. It doesn't mean He made it into an egg. That's not how the verb was ever used. So there's this huge jump made because the roots somewhere in there involves an ostrich egg, that we turn this into the earth as egg, like the earth is oval. That's awesome. It doesn't have to be mentioned in the Quran, though. Let's not impose on the Quran what Allah did not say Himself. And when you do that and then other people prove otherwise, it just makes the Quran look weak, even though the only thing weak was our understanding, so we should be careful about making claims like that. And so to make something smooth, and even what Allah is saying is on the earth, He removed unevenness. You saw previously, and didn't we make the earth a comfortable bedding, right? Allah is describing that the earth could have been a jagged surface where you can't walk. And that the Arabs are actually familiar with this. There are terrains that are so difficult to walk, or it's difficult to even animals don't go there. And the entire earth's surface could have been that way, but Allah made it smooth and removed the impediments on the earth so we can travel on this earth. And that's why they use the word for even construction. Like, if they're going to build a road and there are lots of pebbles on the road and stuff, they'll have bulldozers come and sweep and then smooth the thing out before they build the road on top. That's actually the process of daha. That's what the word refers to well. Meaning, the land is ready for civilization basically. And this is again going back to the idea that the great civilizations were only great civilizations because they built roads. If you don't have roads, you're not going to have civilizations, because commerce will take place only through the roads. If everything is wild territory, then commerce will not happen, and therefore growth will not take place. Right? One of the greatest assets of the United States is our incredible highway system, right? It's a remarkable roadway system that connects all of the states together and allows for the kind of commerce that happens across the states, right? And so the countries in which the roadways, one, aren't safe, two, aren't. Well built, right? It affects economy, it affects everything you know. So when he says he basically is almost like he's saying he made the world for a world possible to travel by making it smooth. Why is that important? Because when those great civilizations and empires and even the Arabs, because the roots went through Makkah, when they claim that they are at an advantageous position, Allah is saying the very fact that you have these roads wouldn't have been possible if Allah did not smooth the earth for you to begin with. And He brought out from it its water, and He brought out from it its green password. You see a connection to the Pharaoh's empire. Background story that I told you, He brought out the water and the pasture, the greenery, that which was basically the heart and soul of the economy of that great empire. The reason they rose to power, and He placed the mountains, and He put them down, He placed the mountains down. And by the way, what is a great architectural marvel of the ancient Egyptians that resembles a mountain, a pyramids, and He says, what are your pyramids compared to my mountains? And He didn't make one, He has plenty. And He put all of that in place as a thing for all of you to enjoy, for all of you to take advantage of, but not just you, your animals too. And I'd like you to understand here, when Allah says you and your animals, it's significant. Why is it mentioning you and your animals? And everything Allah mentioned so far from the sky, if we go back, the sky, then the night and day, then the earth being smooth, and water and pasture, and now finally the mountains. All of this is things for you, we and our animals to enjoy. Some animals, their pasture, what they eat, what they graze on, what they feed on, is only found in the mountains. It's only found in the mountains. Some minerals, some resources, some construction materials that we need are only found in the mountains. If the night and day weren't the succession that they are, agriculture would stop. If the water didn't come out of the earth the way it does, we wouldn't have the rivers and the waterways that are necessary for crop to exist. So this entire system was put in place for Allah Azza wa Jal to facilitate life on this earth. But now the significance of you and your animals, of course, and especially in ancient society, and even today, without animals, human beings can't survive. We are actually dependent on animals, not just for food, but for skin. And for skin, but for the art, the agricultural value that they have around the world. Without them, without animals, we don't survive in this world. It doesn't happen. But the other thing is, when He puts us together, we are masters over our animals. Listen to this carefully. We are masters over our sheep and our goats and our cows and our horses. They do our work. They exhaust themselves for us. And when they are no good anymore, what do we do with them? We slaughter them and take their meat and their skin or whatever, and we just get rid of them, right? That's what we do. And our animals are literally domesticated. They've been humiliated and domesticated. They live in the housing we give them. They eat what we feed them. They have no independence. They are literally enslaved to our service. That's what these animals are, enslaved to our service and loyal to their masters. They listen to the farmer yell and scream, and they stop and they move, they get whipped, they get pulled, they get their reins pulled. This is what the animals are. And then Allah puts them and us in the same sentence, as if to say, what your animals are to you, you are to me, you are to me, no different than your cattle. I feed you like I feed them. If this is actually a humility check from Allah, Allah mentioned one of the most arrogant human beings that ever lived, that looked at other people like animals. Remember now, Allah is putting us all in check. You're all not sure. To me, you're all provided for like animals are provided for. This is actually a running theme in Quran. Look at your animals and then think about who Allah is to you. You are rubbed over your animal. Allah is rub over you. This is the mentality and the way that the animal never disobeys you. And what do you do with your animal when he disobeys you? What should Allah do when you disobey him? You know a utility and a means to enjoy. For you and for your animals, mata can be used for food. It can be also used for something to enjoy. And by its definition can also be something that is temporary enjoyment. So something that you have for a while, but it's not going to last forever. And why isn't it going to last forever? Let's transition from there. This is now we're nearing the end of the surah. This is the 5th section of the surah in my account, when finally Cobra heads. What is when the ocean has a tsunami? That's them a great calamity, a massive disturbance that destroys, Allah says. Meaning when the calamity that is going to wreck everything arrives, the greatest calamity that's ever happened, and the greatest disturbance that's ever happened arrives, by the way, when water comes out like that. What happens to animals? What do you actually see? Animals run way before the water even comes. They can sense the shivering of the earth. The words right before were an amicum cattle. That. Take it easy from neuroma soft movement, but now atama is coming. All of a sudden the disturbance is coming, and that is, I should have mentioned. This either in Arabic means all of a sudden. It doesn't just mean when it means when all of a sudden there's great calamity arrives. This is the mubarakiyama, the suddenness of the day on which every human being will thoroughly remember. Ali, insan is so amazing. It means human being, but insan can also be argued to come from nishan, meaning forgetfulness, so that the actual word for human being in Arabic is close to forgetful creature. It's close to the meaning of forgetful creature, the day on which the forgetful creature will thoroughly remember, will have full memory. Let's not get into that discussion, but I'll just say, if it's more closer to mamas, which means in simple English, the day on which a human being will thoroughly recall all of his efforts, every effort that was made. What were you running for? What were you running towards? What was keeping you occupied? You know, every human being has priorities. All of you, every single one of us, including myself, have priorities on when we're going to wake up, when we're going to go sleep, and what's going to happen in between. Whether your priorities to finish season 3 and start season 4 on Netflix, whether your priorities to beat that video game and finish all of the side missions, or whether your priority is, work related, business related, deal related, car related, whether your priority is girl related, guy related, social media related, hangout related, going to get the tickets for that concert or whatever it may be. There are priorities, things you run towards, things that are preoccupying you, things that are keeping you busy. Some of those are serious tasks. Some of those are just you running after entertainment or pleasure. Whatever they are, every one of them will be completely recalled. You're going to remember what it was that was keeping you occupied. There's a scene that takes place in the world every single day. A mother begs her son, okay, son, is a lot of time. Just pray. Suddenly, it's time for prayer. Just pray. Well, I don't have time right now. Just a couple minutes running towards something else, and then that day he'll remember, oh my God, what was I running towards? What efforts was I making? Where was I wasting all my efforts? Those who's. efforts were lost, completely put in vain, lost in stuff that's left behind in worldly life, while at the same time they're delusional that they've done something awesome they haven't that day. Human beings will remember everything, every effort that they made, like Allah says the day on, which Allah will resurrect all of them all together. He will inform them. Very detailed. All the things that they used to do that Allah recorded in its entirety and perfectly, while they had forgotten the stuff that they did. Literally, Allah will say, you did this, you're like, really, I did that. I said that, no, you guys even do that, now forget. Your mom will tell your dad will tell your friends, you know what you said to me the other day? You said this is like, no, I would never, I'm not that kind of person, I recorded. It for you here, wow, I can't believe I did that, there's going to be a lot I can't believe I said that, I can't believe I did that. Moment siyama, we do things that we forget, or they're no big deal to us, we just move on. But that day, everything will be thoroughly recalled. May Allah make us of those that are forgiven after remembering the efforts that we made. Foreign human beings will have nothing to their advantage on judgment to accept what they ran towards, literally what they ran towards.